With spring ball in the rearview mirror, it's time to take out the leaders that guided those programs throughout spring practice. The head coaches. I'm going to rank all 18 Big Ten head coaches, 1 through 18.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
There's some really good head coaches that, for example, are going to be in that, say, 11 through 15 range on this list. And it doesn't mean that those coaches are average coaches or bad head coaches. It just means that there's a lot of really good coaches in this conference, and with the sheer amount of teams now at 18, you're going to get some of those coaches that are maybe pushed back a little bit. I'm not sure if there's a truly bad coach in this conference. I think there's inexperienced coaches. I think there are coaches that are looking to prove a little bit more, and maybe they're a little bit lower on this list, but they can certainly jump up as 2024, maybe the season of unpredictability really begins. Let's talk about criteria. I think because of all of the moving parts in this conference, newness, no divisions, all that sort of stuff, I think you got to take in the entire body of work. Not just Big Ten and experience, although those factors are going to play in some certain parts when comparing a coach or two or three, but I think you got to take in the entire body of work. Not just where they are now, but where they have been and what their entire career really looks like as well. I'm talking about recruiting, I'm talking about development, I'm talking about retainment of staff, I'm talking about the entire thing when factoring in these rankings as it pertains to Big Ten head coaches. This was no easy task, but let's get into it. Another grand reveal. I think now with Jim Harbaugh out of this conference, he won a national championship, now he's on to the National Football League. I think there's a clear number one, and it's Ohio State's Ryan Day. What he's been able to do after subbing in for Urban Meyer, this is a perennial top 5 college football program, recruiting-wise, on the field. Like 8 losses. Ryan Day has lost 8 games. He's won 56 and 8 record for Ryan Day at Ohio State. 3 of those losses have come to the Michigan Wolverines as of late. So he wins a whole lot of football games and he develops a whole lot of talent to the National Football League. That's what it's all about when it all comes down to it. So you can argue in other spots, but I think Ryan Day is the clear number 1 coach in the Big Ten Conference right now. Now we get into some battles. Lincoln Riley at number 2. I think there are some traditional Big Ten fans out there that may not be very happy with me putting Lincoln Riley at number 2 in these rankings. I know his defenses, even when he made 3 consecutive college football playoffs at Oklahoma, even those defenses weren't very good. We know he maybe struggles on that side of the football, but when you're elite and maybe the best at what you do in a specific area, that certainly says something. Lincoln Riley is elite at developing quarterbacks and developing high-octane explosive offenses. Not 1, not 2, but he has developed 3 Heisman Trophy winners. It's about being in that college football playoff. Now, he didn't win a playoff game, but to be able to be in that position really just goes to show you what the type of program that he can put together on the field to get there, even when the defense has been lacking all this time. Look at his first year at USC. Okay, that was a bad defense, probably the worst defense he's been around. And he had Caleb Williams on a leg and a half, as well as that bad defense, and yet they were 1 game away from making the college football playoff in his first season. When you talk about James Franklin right now, it's just ho-hum. They produce 9-win seasons, 10-win seasons, stuff like that. 5 10-win seasons at Penn State for James Franklin. 3 New Year's Six Bowl victories, 4 top 10 finishes, NFL talent like Saquon Barkley, Micah Parsons, Chop Robinson, and others. You know, you look at that resume. That is a heck of a resume. And then you look at some of the leading passers in Penn State history have been under his watch, guys like Trace McSorley, and the leading passer in Nittany Lion history in Sean Clifford as well. I know sometimes we maybe underappreciate what Penn State is because they continuously hit this roadblock. They're not able to beat Michigan. They're not able to beat Ohio State. But when you can consistently consistently win at that type of level, that says something to the type of program that you've built. Kirk Ferentz is maybe a little bit lower on this list because of what has happened on the offensive side of the ball. Like, if you're going to knock Lincoln Riley on defense, I think you have to knock Kirk Ferentz on the offensive side of the football, his stubbornness. But he's still a really good coach. He's still one of the best head coaches in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. When you talk about development, specifically on the defensive side of the football, it is awesome what he has been able to do, developing these great defenses and players that have gone on to be high-level draft picks in the National Football League. First-round type of talent that comes out of Iowa. These guys, they're not high stars. They're not four-star guys. They're not five-star guys. But the Hawkeyes continue to develop those maybe lesser recruited guys into high-level NFL talent. Now, some people may say that's a lot due to Phil Parker, but for Kirk Ferentz to keep Phil Parker around all of these years, that's got to say something about him as well. Dan Lanning is so close to maybe being number 3 or maybe even being number 2 on this list. He beat a couple of top 10 teams in his first year as head coach. I think UCLA and Utah were both ranked in the top 10 when he was able to defeat them. But I don't know if he has a big signature marquee victory. He had the opportunity to get that this past year in his second year as head coach of the Ducks, wasn't able to get it done. Like, if he's able to beat Washington in the Pac-12 title game, they go to the playoff, and they probably beat Texas, and they're probably playing Michigan in the national championship game. And then who knows what happens from there. If that's the case, he's probably at number 3. Heck, he might be even at number 2 on this list. When it comes to recruiting, when it comes to talent acquisition, he's number 1. He's number 1. What Dan Lanning has been able to do this offseason, assembling the best roster in Oregon history, just goes to show you his talent level on that side of things as a head coach. Now he has to translate that into big-time victories. He's moving to a new conference. That has to say something. You have Ohio State on your schedule. You have Michigan on your schedule. You have Wisconsin on your schedule. You're going to have an opportunity to prove just what level of an elite coach you are. Dan Lanning, it would not surprise me if he is in the top 3 or the top 2 when we do this list next year. Man, it seems like Luke Fickell and Matt Rule are always going to be tied at the hip. They were hired in the same head coaching cycle by programs that are looking for them to elevate themselves. Big Ten West rivals within that quad of hate. But I put Luke Fickell just a little bit higher. He did better in his first season as head coach. Both the Badgers and the Huskers had some injury issues that they both had to battle through. You could argue some had it worse than others, but there were some issues maybe with Nebraska in year number 1 with all of the turnovers within this program. You look at Wisconsin, you look at Nebraska. I think these are programs that are going to be on a similar trajectory as they continue to move forward with their respective head coaches as we go forth. But as I said at the beginning, I think you got to look at the entire body of work. Although Matt Rule has a really good body of work, what he was able to do both at Temple and Baylor, and Luke Fickell took a group of 5 team to the college football playoff. You look at Luke Fickell's track record of maybe developing players like the Sauce Gardners of the world and putting them on to that next level. Slightly Fickell over Rule, although that could maybe change. Year 2 is going to be a huge year for both the Badgers and the Huskers, led by their respective head coaches. Let's move on to number 8. Let's talk P.J. Fleck. We know he had that great year in 2019, capturing 11 victories that year in an Outback Bowl victory. He won 9 games apiece in 2021 and 2022. Okay, he's developed a model of consistency at Minnesota. I know they took a little bit of a dip this past year at 5-7, but when you talk about the development factor, okay, we talk about Michigan maybe being at the top and developing those 4 stars into first-round NFL draft picks, but you look at Minnesota maybe developing a lot of those 3 stars and developing them into those mid-round NFL guys. I love Greg Schiano. He's one of my favorite head coaches in the Big Ten. He's that no-nonsense, blue-collar, traditional type of Big Ten head football coach. He's number 9 on this list because it is so difficult to win at Rutgers. The Scarlet Knights have been playing college football. They played in the very first college football game 4 years after the end of the Civil War. In 1869, they played Princeton. One guy has been able to win consistently, really, at Rutgers, and it's this guy. It's Greg Schiano. He's very respected within his circles. And then you look at what he has turned the Big Ten edition of Rutgers into. Before Schiano came into Piscataway, you look at the Kyle Floods and the Chris Asters of the world, Rutgers was in the basement. Rutgers was the laughingstock. Everybody was wondering, why did we invite Rutgers into this conference? But Greg Schiano has turned that. He has molded the clay that is Rutgers football, and he has turned them into a smash mouth type of football team. And then you look at his ability to retain some of this talent. Okay, because Rutgers is a place, hey, if I'm good, I have a good season. Kyle Monangai, I lead the Big Ten in rushing. Oh, I'll just transfer and go to a bigger program and take a bigger payday. You look at guys like Kyle Monangai, you look at a lot of guys on this defense running it back one more year. And that goes to show the structure of the program that Greg Schiano has built. Schiano and Jonathan Smith at number 10, I think are pretty similar. They want to build their teams maybe from the inside out. They want to be tough, physical. They want to establish the trenches and be really good at the line of scrimmage. Jonathan Smith has done a really good job with the offensive line at Oregon State. And like Schiano at Rutgers, Oregon State is not an easy place to win it as well. And he was able to build and turn around that program as well. I think I give Schiano the edge because this is that experience factor. Maybe this is the Big Ten factor as well. Smith has not lived, played, or coached east of the state of Montana ever in his life. So I think this is a pretty big adjustment going into the Midwest at Michigan, going into a new conference, and lately these past couple of weeks, I think NIL has a pretty big part to say in this as well. But he's kind of struggled with retaining some of these players. You look at the Derek Harmons, you look at the Simeon Barrows, the Jaden Magnums, you see some of those guys portal out of Michigan State in the spring. So I think this goes from maybe a team that could be a surprise team that could maybe win 8 games, pull a few upsets. Now they go into rebuild mode. So rebuild mode, new team, new conference. I think there's a lot of uncertainties there for Jonathan Smith, and I see the trajectory where Greg Schiano's program is going. I honestly believe Mike Locksley is one of the more underrated coaches, not only in the Big Ten, but maybe in all of college football. We talk about tough places to win. We just mentioned Rutgers. We just mentioned Oregon State. I think you got to throw in Maryland as well. Look at the Randy Edsall era. Look at the DJ Durkin era as well. It is not easy, but now we've gotten to a situation where Mike Locksley has raised the floor in College Park, and we just expect, like we expect James Franklin to just win 9 or 10 games every year, we expect Mike Locksley in Maryland to just win 7 or 8 games every year. That's the expectation. Not only that, but they've been playing in maybe the toughest division in college football in the Big Ten East with the Michigans, with the Ohio States, and the Penn State, where you can chalk up almost 3 losses, unfortunately, for the Terps every year, but yet he's still able to turn out some really good season against the rest of his schedule. He has locked down that DMV area. He has made it important and a priority for those kids to end up at Maryland. I think they have a really underrated defense this season. He can scheme up just about anything on the offensive side of the football. He's played up to his competition. Maybe not Penn State. Penn State has really had their number. They've boat raced him a good amount of times. But you look at Michigan and Ohio State the last few years before the game in the last week of the season. A couple of years back, they went toe-to-toe offensively with the Buckeyes in College Park. This past year, also in College Park, Michigan had a tough time with the Maryland Terrapins, so he can certainly play up to his competition. But then there's some other games where Maryland kind of plays down a little bit. You look at the Northwestern game this past year, maybe a little bit of frustrating losses, but I think there's a lot of good things to like about Mike Locksley. Jedd Fisch at 12, I think, has the ability to rise up this list. I really like what he was able to do in a short period of time at Arizona. But remember, just 1 year above 500 as a head coach. He's only had 3 years as a head coach. Arizona was his very first job as a leader of a college football program. So that's got to be taken into effect as well within these rankings. But I love what he's done, having guys like Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, and even Steve Ballmer on campus. I think he understands the new wave and the new era of college football. I think he wants to play into that a little bit. When you talk about coaches that maybe understand the new era and where college football is going, I think he's one of those coaches that really stand out. And of course, he has that NFL background as well. This is a Washington team that has a lot of uncertainty this year. Now, the cupboard's not completely bare. There are some pieces to play with on the chessboard for Jedd Fisch in Seattle, but there's still a lot of uncertainty, and we're going to really see how good of a coach with roster management, kind of putting the right pieces in the right places, that Jedd Fisch is here in 2024. I really struggled between 13 and 14, Sharon Moore and Brett Bielema. I gave Sharon Moore a little bit of an edge and let me explain. When I talk about Moore, I'm not willing to put him maybe into the top 10 in these rankings, like maybe some other outlets as well. Like he's only coached a handful of games, okay, and he was an assistant coach. Like Jim Harbaugh was available during the week of practice. He just wasn't able to be coaching in the game. Now, Sherrone Moore deserves a lot of credit for what he was able to do in those games against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State at the end of the season, but he's still very inexperienced. And now without the oversight of Jim Harbaugh, it's up to him to build this program. What is a Sherrone Moore program going to look like? You have to give Sherrone Moore a decent amount of credit, though, for what Michigan is and what they become, right? He was the offensive line coach. He became the offensive coordinator. This offensive line has been the building block to Michigan's success over the last handful of seasons. Joe Moore award-winning offensive lines. You talk about that stout run game, and Sherrone Moore is a big part of that. Like when he was the head coach in that Penn State game, he refused to throw the ball during the fourth quarter. We heard that all about that in draft time when talking about J.J. McCarthy, but he really leaned on that, and that was kind of maybe a part of his DNA, and that was the part of Michigan's DNA in association with kind of Jim Harbaugh and what they become. So I think Sherrone Moore is going to be an extension of Jim Harbaugh. It's just, let's see it play out on the field, especially with this year with those missing pieces on the offensive side of the football. I feel really bad putting Brett Bielema at 14. I really like Bert as a head coach. When you talk about raising the floor, I talked about Mike Locksley at Maryland. You got to talk about Brett Bielema at Illinois raising the floor. Okay, a couple of 5 and 7 seasons, he's raised it from where Tim Beckman was, from where Lovie Smith was. Kind of you're out of the Big Ten basement a little bit, and now you're teetering on bowl eligibility as some of your worst seasons right now at Illinois. Now, that being said, I think he's left some money on the table. You look at that 2022 season, Illinois was the best team in the Big Ten West. Okay, but they kind of struggled a little bit down the stretch, losing games to Purdue, losing a game they should have won against Michigan State. So I think that's got to play into it as well. You look at this past season, that defense took a pretty big dip. Now, we figured it would go down a little bit, losing their defensive coordinator, losing a lot of really good talent in the secondary. They still had Johnny Newton. They still had Keith Randolph. They still had a pretty good linebacking core. But it took, I think, a bigger drop than some people were expecting. But even that, I thought this should have been a bowl team. I thought this team had enough talent to win 6 games. They failed to do so. So the shine has maybe come off of Brett Bielema a little bit, but I still think he's a really good coach. This ranking right here shows the depth of the Big Ten when you have a guy like Brett Bielema at 14. I don't think even the most hardcore UCLA Bruins fan will argue with Deshaun Foster being number 18 on this list. He's only been a position coach, never been a coordinator, never been a head coach. So I don't think there's much argument there. Although I like what he's done. Okay, you can tell he's passionate about UCLA football, hiring Eric Bieniemy and all that. So 18, I feel, and I think a lot of people feel pretty solidified having Foster at the bottom of this list. So that gets us to 15 to 17 to really figure things out. David Braun, what he was able to do in year number 1 at Northwestern with no head coaching experience, with no FBS experience, really impressed me. He really played off of the emotions, the us versus the world mentality in that big turnaround. And you can tell maybe as a football coach, he's maybe Pat Fitzgerald 2.0, which is not a welcome sight to maybe some of these other teams in the Big Ten when you talk about that era of Northwestern football where they can be that pesky team on the schedule. But you talk about that emotion, you talk about that us against the world. Now what are we going to see out of David Braun? Okay, now people maybe respect you a little bit more. You're not saying, hey, this team's going to go 0-12, this team's going to go 1-11. Now, hey, they won 7 games in the regular season. They won a bowl game. They won 8 games last season. Now we need to take David Braun and Northwestern a little bit more seriously. Now you can't sneak up onto people. Now how are you going to structure your program over the years without that intense motivation that you can really use to get a lot of these guys motivated? What's going to be the motivational factor for David Braun within this program? It's going to be very interesting to see how that develops over the years. Curt Cignetti has coached 2 years of FBS football. Other than that, it's been lower level football. And that's because James Madison made the transition from FCS to FBS. So when you have a coach going from the group of 5 to the Power 2, that's a sizable jump. Now, I like what Curt Cignetti has done over his time developing specifically quarterbacks, but offenses over the years, and I think that's what Indiana really wanted to lean into. And I like what he's building right now at Indiana. I love his moxie and his confidence. I put Curt above Ryan Walters. I think he's got more experience, a little bit more of a track record from the head coaching standpoint. Kurt does over Ryan Walters, of course, 4-8 in his first season as head coach of the Boilermakers. But Ryan has done really good on the recruiting trail. It would not surprise me to see Purdue take a pretty sizable jump this year and maybe into the future with the type of talent that Ryan is bringing in West Lafayette, Indiana. Everybody's got a thought. Everybody's got an opinion on power rankings, and coaching power rankings maybe takes it to a new level. I want to hear your opinion. Leave it in the thoughts in the comments below. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Everything Big Ten head coach power rankings below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.